Okay, thank you all very much. We are going to start with our first panel, from the academia. This panel is titled The Anti-Corruption in Practice, and Mario Hidalgo is going to be the moderator of the panel. So, Mario, please.
Thank you. Hello to all. My name is Mario, and I am from the Transparency and Anti-Corruption Laboratory at Universidad UTE in Ecuador. Okay, better. Okay. Yeah. And I'm gonna moderate this panel. And I want to begin by introducing our first guest speaker in this panel of anti-corruption in practice, Byron Antonio Villacis from the University of Oregon in the US, with his topic, Beyond Corruption, Unveiling the Wider Impact of Anti-Corruption Programs in Latin America. Byron is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Oregon. Prior to joining that university, Dr. Villacis was an assistant professor of sociology at Bowdoin College. Professor Villacis received a bachelor degree in economics from University San Francisco de Quito, a Master of Science in Economics from the Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales, Flaxo, and a PhD in Sociology and Demography from the University of California, Berkeley in 2023. Before his PhD, he was the head of the National Institute of Statistics and Censuses of Ecuador. His research focuses on exploring how societies shape and are shaped by quantifications, studying the role of experts and how power relations shape expertise in the fields of corruption, dollarization, statistics, and gender, and understanding how modern notions of anti-corruption are associated with austerity, inequality, and the compression of markets. Just one final thing, we're gonna have 5 speakers, and we will have the questions after all of them have presented their presentations. So welcome, Byron.
No estoy seguro si es esta o...
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's fine.
So you can see it now?
Yeah, it's fine. Great.
Okay. Perfecto. Muchas gracias. The presentation is in English and I'm going to talk in Spanish. But, la intención es que se trate de entender a la mayor cantidad de personas posible. Primero, muchísimas gracias por este espacio. Es un verdadero privilegio compartir con ustedes estas ideas. Quiero agradecer a Bonnie y a todos los organizadores por este espacio. Para quienes investigamos anticorrupción, sabemos que sobre todo espacios en nuestra región hacen falta muchísimo. Así que es del todo importante que podamos compartir nuestras ideas para entender nuestra realidad desde nuestra propia región. Yo investigo la asociación o el impacto que existe entre los programas de anticorrupción y 2 elementos principales, la austeridad y la desigualdad. Este proyecto se trata de identificar cuál es el impacto más allá de la propia gestión de la anticorrupción y ser crítico respecto a las agendas de adopción de políticas anticorrupción en la región. El día de hoy me voy a centrar en la asociación que existe entre la adopción de políticas anticorrupción y la adopción de programas de austeridad. Sin embargo, el proyecto en su conjunto trata de investigar no solo el impacto en austeridad, sino también en desigualdad. La agenda para el día de hoy está compuesta de 4 puntos. Brevemente voy a mostrar cuáles son las preguntas de investigación y las respuestas de forma preliminar para luego desarrollar los argumentos a través de 3 capítulos. Primero, un conceptual background muy preliminar para que comprendan un poco cuál es la lógica de la perspectiva conceptual. Luego, los métodos que he aplicado y finalmente concentrarme en los hallazgos. Bien. La primera pregunta que trato de explorar es cuál es la relación que existe entre las políticas anticorrupción adoptadas en la región en los últimos 40 años y la adopción de programas de austeridad. Básicamente, y a través de métodos cuantitativos y cualitativos, argumento que existe una relación, sin embargo, es específica sobre los siguientes países: México, Guatemala, Panamá, Venezuela y Perú. Como veremos más adelante, hay otros países donde esta relación es tenue, por no decir ambigua, y de hecho un país donde la relación inclusive es inversa a lo esperada, lo cual es Chile. La segunda pregunta que propongo en esta parte de la investigación es cuáles son los mecanismos detrás de esta asociación. Es decir, qué es lo que hace que la adopción de una agenda anticorrupción se transforme en una agenda de austeridad. Como veremos más adelante, argumento que existen tres mecanismos detrás de este proceso. El primero es el entendimiento de la corrupción como un dato, o lo que se denomina la dataificación, un proceso social que nos llevó a comprender la corrupción como un fenómeno conmensurable y cuantitativo. Es el primer mecanismo que argumento que existe para esta transmisión. El segundo son los procesos de financiarización, es decir, la adopción de programas de austeridad que básicamente lo que fomentaron fue la adopción de programas económicos que parametrizaron la corrupción como un mecanismo conmensurable. Y el tercero es la emergencia de grupos sociales que lo que hicieron fue transnacionalmente migrar ideas desde el norte global hacia el sur global respecto a las nociones de anticorrupción. Sin embargo, la composición específica de estos grupos sociales hizo que la transmisión de estas ideas no sea aislada de ciertas perspectivas conceptuales. Principalmente la noción que más influenció esta migración de ideas del norte al sur global fue entender la corrupción de una forma muy específica, muy parametrizable, conmensurable y sobre todo cuantitativa. Bien. Muy brevemente, la postura que adopto en esta idea es básicamente entender de una postura crítica que hay que problematizar aquella noción que homogeniza la corrupción como un fenómeno que es comparable. Esto parte de una literatura que es bastante fértil respecto a tener una postura crítica también respecto a por qué es peligroso, por así decirlo menos, o inclusive riesgoso, cuantificar la corrupción a través de un mecanismo de homogenización. Hay autores que argumentan que esto está asociado con una técnica o una receta que fue homogenizada en la región desde los años 90, en la cual se entendía la corrupción básicamente como un proceso que debe converger a través de la adopción de más democracia. El problema es que la adopción de estos programas de más democracia obviamente simplificaba procesos complejos que requerían antes de implementarse estas fórmulas. A través de esta literatura también se ha problematizado la emergencia de expertos, sobre todo en aspectos legales, lo cual, como veremos más adelante, es uno de los elementos que más influye en que la adopción de la agenda anticorrupción en la región, sobre todo, haya tomado un tono legalista. Bien. No me voy a detener mucho en los parámetros metodológicos, sin embargo pueden interrumpirme cuando ustedes deseen. Básicamente la investigación está apoyada en 4 patas. La primera son métodos de archivos donde he identificado y analizado las reformas de anticorrupción en los últimos 40 años en 17 países de la región. Luego hice un proceso de codificación y análisis, hice 44 entrevistas a profundidad en 4 países, Brasil, Ecuador, Estados Unidos y Alemania. En la primera parte de esta exploración, lo que hice fue apoyarme en estas entrevistas para identificar quiénes son los actores que fomentaron la emergencia de esta agenda. Luego, a través de un modelo cuantitativo, lo que hice fue identificar cuál es la asociación entre la adopción de la agenda anticorrupción y la evolución de la agenda de austeridad. Y finalmente complementé con una etapa cualitativa conclusiva para socializar las conclusiones tentativas y tratar de moldearlas de una forma más ajustada a la noción de los propios expertos en la región. Bien, la presentación está concentrada en 2 elementos, el elemento cuantitativo y el elemento cualitativo. Sin embargo, por cuestiones de espacio y hasta de didáctica, voy a concentrarme sobre todo en la parte cualitativa. En la parte de preguntas, igual la presentación va a estar disponible para todos. Les puedo dejar los detalles para que se puedan analizar a mayor especificidad cualquiera de las secciones de la investigación. Bien, me pregunto primero entonces quiénes, cómo y cuándo se implementó esta agenda en la región. Sabemos perfectamente ahora, gracias a la literatura, inclusive por las grandes contribuciones como personas como Bonnie, que Esta agenda se implementó a partir de los años 90 a través de estos esfuerzos que hubo para democratizar y crear instituciones liberales en la región. Eso, sin embargo, atravesó un proceso de transformación, de mutación, que devino en algunos casos positivos y en otros casos negativos. La judicialización, los procesos de la emergencia de expertos anticorrupción y también la utilización de la agenda anticorrupción como un proceso de política y de ataque entre facciones políticas. A través de eso se identifican actores que sabemos cuáles han sido sus roles. Más allá de leer e identificar quiénes están detrás, aquí quiero hacer una connotación respecto a qué tipo de poder tienen los actores que han facilitado el proceso de adopción de políticas anticorrupción en la región. No son actores menores, no son actores sin poder. Lo que quiero empezar a resaltar en este punto de la presentación es que el rol de los actores que ayudaron a esta implementación se debió gracias a una combinación de poder político y poder económico, es decir, una elitización de la agenda desde su propia génesis. Hay una recolección de cuáles son las reformas que han sucedido en cada uno de los países en cada año, están las especificaciones, más que todo podemos ver cuándo estas reformas anticorrupción tomaron mayor tendencia, sobre todo a partir de los años 2010. Antes de eso variaba dependiendo del país. Y también podemos saber dónde se aplicaron, con casos mucho más particulares como el caso de Argentina, Ecuador y Paraguay. Lo que debe quedar como una conclusión inicial en este punto es que no fue una reforma o una implementación o una adopción uniforme, y que los actores detrás fueron actores con poder político y financiero, es decir, un poder elitista respecto a la implementación de políticas anticorrupción. La intención es ver cómo se asocia con adopciones de austeridad, de programas de austeridad. Por supuesto, hay varias métricas, el análisis utiliza varias versiones. No me voy a detener mucho en estos elementos, pero la intención era tratar de identificar un modelo que identifique cuál es la relación que existe entre la adopción de austeridad y la adopción de políticas anticorrupción. Obviamente tratando de incluir variables de control, como el crecimiento económico, la adopción de programas de deuda con el Fondo Monetario, temas electorales, entre otros. Más allá de eso, lo que quiero llamar la atención desde el inicio es que esta asociación entre la adopción de agendas anticorrupción y la adopción de agendas de austeridad se concentra sobre todo en países donde existió un programa financiero donde normalmente estaba envuelto el Fondo Monetario Internacional. Esa es una de las primeras cosas que llama la atención. No necesariamente y obviamente al mismo año de la adopción de los programas, siempre hay retrasos de 1 o 2 años, pero esa asociación se intensifica en aquellos países donde esta financiarización se volvió más intensa. El segundo elemento es tratar de identificar dónde existió este impacto con mayor intensidad. Como mencioné anteriormente, son los casos de Perú, Venezuela, Panamá, Guatemala y México con mayor intensidad y en Colombia con menor intensidad. En los países de Argentina, Bolivia, Brasil, Costa Rica, República Dominicana, Ecuador, Honduras y El Salvador, la asociación es ambigua y no es significativa. Sin embargo, en el caso de Chile, de hecho, la adopción de políticas anticorrupción significó un incremento de los gastos en el sector social, es decir, lo contrario a lo que se había propuesto en la hipótesis. Ahora bien, hay un análisis obviamente más detallado. Lo que trato de ejemplificar en los siguientes gráficos es qué países tuvieron mayor intensidad en esta asociación. Si es que el país se encuentra en el lado izquierdo del gráfico, existe un impacto de la adopción de políticas anticorrupción con la austeridad. Si está en el lado derecho, significa que no existió esa adopción. Y si es que el país se encuentra más arriba en el eje vertical, significa que hay mayor número de regulaciones anticorrupción. Entonces, en teoría, aquellos países que se encuentran donde están los puntos amarillos es donde debería haber una asociación entre la adopción de políticas anticorrupción y la adopción de agendas de austeridad. No me voy a detener en cada uno de ellos, simplemente les voy a mostrar uno para que ustedes puedan ver en detalle cada uno de ellos. He puesto también cada uno de los países. Pueden ver el nivel de intensidad de la adopción del programa de austeridad en el eje horizontal y el número de adopción de políticas anticorrupción, sobre todo de normativas nacionales y regionales en el eje horizontal. Acá está cada uno de los países para que cualquier persona pueda revisarlos e identificar no solamente el nivel de asociación que existe en cada país, sino la intensidad que provocó cada una de las regiones. Como digo, hay muchos países como Argentina que tuvieron muchísimas reformas, pero no tuvieron una asociación significativa respecto al incremento de programas de austeridad, y eso va a cambiar respecto a cada país. Me voy a concentrar ahora en la segunda parte de la presentación, que es analizar los aspectos que significan el mecanismo detrás de esta asociación. Ok, para poder identificar los mecanismos que significaron una asociación entre la adopción de políticas anticorrupción y los programas de austeridad, utilicé entrevistas a profundidad donde básicamente codifiqué y analicé este tipo de preguntas. Primero, cómo se introdujeron aquellas preguntas y cómo estos procesos fueron legitimizados. El primero de ellos es el de la dataificación de la corrupción. Aquí hay simplemente 3 respuestas que tratan de resumir la codificación de esas entrevistas. Por ejemplo, un oficial de anticorrupción en Brasil nos decía, once the bill passed, we need to operationalize the anti-corruption efforts. Most people understood those as cutting expenses and quantify them. Otro caso, por ejemplo, el contralor, en ese caso de Ecuador, en ese tiempo, nos dijo que data-driven policy making is a responsible approach to governance. If we want to curb corruption, we need to measure. Y lo mismo pasó con académicos de Alemania que nos decían opiniones como esta. Es parte del New Public Management. Si queremos entender la corrupción, necesitamos cuantificarlas. Entonces, uno de los primeros mecanismos que aparece sistemáticamente en las entrevistas es cómo se llegó a empezar a entender la adopción de la política anticorrupción como un tema de cuantifiquemos, necesitamos medir, y para eso significa básicamente reducir gastos. El segundo mecanismo es el de la financiarización. No me voy a detener en las opiniones por cuestiones de tiempo, pero básicamente las opiniones convergían en esta idea de que si quiero adoptar un programa de anticorrupción, tiene que asociarse con un compliance respecto a determinados requisitos y condicionalidades que tenían los organismos internacionales en estos países. Es decir, tengo que medir la corrupción, y la corrupción se mide a través del perception del IPC, del Transparency International, y eso me significa que necesito parametrizar y transformar la corrupción en un mecanismo de austeridad. Por lo tanto, la intención es que detrás de este proceso, el segundo mecanismo es la financiarización. El último proceso es la emergencia o la aparición de brokers que lo que hicieron fue migrar estas ideas de anticorrupción del norte global hacia el sur global. En ONGs, por ejemplo, como Participación Ciudadana en Ecuador, recibieron fondos para poder parametrizar ciertas leyes que fueron luego introducidas en la legislación ecuatoriana. Lo curioso es que esta adopción no era muchas veces ni siquiera discutida, era simplemente adoptada porque había detrás un ejercicio financiero de promoverlas y de adoptarlas. Por lo tanto, considero que el tercer mecanismo que está detrás de esta adopción es la emergencia de brokers, que ayudaron a migrar estas ideas desde el norte global hacia el sur global. Ahora bien, eso se resume entonces en estas conclusiones preliminares que trato de argumentar. Estos mecanismos son los que considero que están detrás de este proceso, pero que también nos ayuda a pensar respecto a las consecuencias que tenemos en la agenda de corrupción en la región. Como bien escuchábamos a Bonnie en la presentación anterior, los resultados no son positivos, los resultados de hecho son riesgosos. Los resultados lo que han hecho es crear estas reformas con un mecanismo en el cual más bien se han convertido en elementos de prácticas de ataque político. Y eso está asociado, considero, no solo con una elitización de la agenda anticorrupción, sino además con un tema de una sobrecarga legalista en la adopción de estas perspectivas. Es decir, reformar leyes para tratar de cambiar instituciones sin cuestionarnos lo que está detrás en el proceso de hecho ético o moral en la agenda anticorrupción. Concluyo la presentación con una idea tratando de resaltar por qué es necesario quizás replantear esta agenda para poder reposicionar estos errores que considero que sabemos ahora que son visibles en nuestra agenda. ¿Qué pasaría si es que creamos una agenda anticorrupción que tiene una ideología distinta? Que se plantea al menos cuestionarse qué tipo de poder y qué tipo de despliegue de poder económico y financiero están influyendo en la adopción de estas agendas anticorrupción en la región. ¿Qué pasaría si, por ejemplo, desvinculamos o cambiamos esa convergencia de la adopción de políticas anticorrupción para que no dependan de dependencias o condicionalidades financieras? Ahí quizás vale la pena preguntarse por qué es necesario que las agendas anticorrupción se cuestionen sobre las personas que tienen o no tienen poder. Como ustedes saben, lo que está sucediendo ahora en El Salvador con Ruth López es una materialización de este problema. Personas que han sido gestoras de programas anticorrupción, pero que no tienen poder. O como el presidente de El Salvador, que llegó al poder gracias a una agenda anticorrupción. La diferencia entre los dos es que el uno tiene poder y el otro no. Entonces, detrás de este proceso está la instrumentalización de la agenda anticorrupción. Por eso es necesario no solo introducir las reformas, sino cuestionarse qué poder está detrás de ellas. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Byron, por exponer además un tema que creo que nos ha llamado la atención a muchas personas latinoamericanas principalmente. El tema de la agenda anticorrupción, quizás hay esta duda, ¿no?, de que se convierte en este caballo de Troya justamente para ver cómo las políticas a nivel latinoamericano son impuestas sobre una base que es muy poco debatible. Si es que nos enfocamos quizás en términos económicos o de desigualdad, hay mucho interés por debatir estos temas, pero cuando hablamos de políticas anticorrupción, como que la gente no se anima mucho a cuestionar esto, así que te agradezco muchísimo por presentarnos de este tema. Ahora voy a dejar de compartir para dar paso a Nicolás Lagos. Nicolás Lagos from Rutgers University. He's going to present transparent algorithms to improve anti-corruption strategies, evidence from public auditors. And Nicolás is a public administrator with a master's degree in government and public management from the University of Chile. He's currently a Fulbright scholar and doctoral candidate at Rutgers University in the US. In 2017, he was awarded the Research Prize from the Latin American Center for Development Administration for his work Integrity and Ethics in Public Service. For 9 years, he worked at the Office of the Comptroller General of Chile, where he coordinated several anti-corruption projects. He is also a research fellow at the Rutgers University Institute for Anti-Corruption Studies, where he is developing his doctoral research on the impact of artificial intelligence in detecting corruption cases. Nicolás, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Mario, and hello everyone there, and everyone who is connected in this conference. So thank you so much to the organizers for bringing together all this research and these studies. I agree, and I follow the message mentioned by Brian, that we need more research and more studies in America. So thank you so much, Bonnie and Giovanna, for organizing this. So today I will present the findings from this research on how algorithmic transparency shape public auditors' willingness to adopt artificial intelligence tool in anti-corruption efforts. As probably many of you can know, that today we have many governments, national audit offices or anti-corruption bodies using artificial intelligence for detecting corruption. For instance, some countries are using machine learning to identify some irregularities in large volumes of information or for public procurement, for instance. But also we have some experiences in some countries who are using natural language processing to assist anti-corruption investigators in writing anti-corruption reports or audit reports that later are submitted to governments or prosecutors. Also, we have an interesting experience in India, where the government is using artificial intelligence to recognize some facial patterns in order to identify irregularities in the delivery of social assistances in public policy related with housing. So at the same time, and on the other hand, we have some not very good experiences. So for instance, in Netherlands, a court banned a welfare fraud for AI system for violating privacy rights and potentially discriminating against low-income residents. Or the Chinese government shut down an anti-corruption system due to the high rates of false alarms and poor accuracy in identifying actual corrupt behavior. So based on this, today we can say that these examples reflect that we currently need to a better understanding on how artificial intelligence is being implemented in the fight against corruption, and especially because the final decision about if or whether a public official will or whether an anti-corruption tool will be used or not, the final decision is made by a public official. So we can have a lot of advancements on this matter, but if the public official doesn't trust in the technology, that technology will be not used, or that will be completely useful. So consequently, a particularly important topic on this matter is how public officials or anti-corruption investigators in this matter are reacting to implementation. So whether they trust on anti-corruption tools and will use in it their daily work. So based on this and building blocks on these ideas, this research aims to explore how transparent algorithms can help anti-corruption investigators trust, and more importantly, if they will follow the recommendation of these software systems. This is a key issue in this or for our field in anti-corruption studies, because previous research has shown that artificial intelligence technology has significant potential for enhancing public auditing as an anti-corruption tool. So today, many of the anti-corruption activities could be automatized by using artificial intelligence techniques. But on the other hand, there is a bias in human beings called the automatization bias that refers to the idea that human beings are always following the recommendation of a artificial intelligence software, because human beings, we trust in the capabilities of the technology. So that's why we follow the recommendations of Waze or Google Maps, for instance, when you are driving. However, in public affairs, studies have shown that public officials' automatization bias remains unclear, because public officials, they trust more in human judgment more than algorithmic recommendations. This creates a paradox, because we can have computer scientists developing very advanced technologies for detecting corruption, but on the other side, we have public officials that they don't trust in that recommendations. So a major concern here is how to promote greater adoption of artificial intelligence tools in anti-corruption efforts. Previous research stressed the idea or the help or the importance of algorithmic transparency to create a better acceptance in human beings, in public officials especially, to follow the recommendation of artificial intelligence softwares. So the research question in this research is, can algorithmic transparency influence anti-corruption auditors to follow the AI-driven software recommendations? To test this, I'm taking I'm based my research on the idea of algorithmic transparency. Algorithmic transparency is something else that only to show to the citizens the coding behind the software. algorithmic transparency is explained mainly for two major dimensions. The first one is explainability, which refers to the idea that the outcomes of an algorithm can be explained in a way a human can understand how or why an algorithmic decision was reached. And in addition, we have a second dimension, which is accessibility. This concept refers to the idea of public availability of source code. So someone, an expert can oversight or can inspect the coding and inspect the data source that is feeding, that is providing information to the artificial intelligence software. Previous research on this matter are mainly focused on the Western world and mainly focused on the citizens' perceptions and the citizens' perception of algorithmic transparency. However, only one study has been focused on public officials, and no one study has been focused on or doing a research on the Americas. So that is a major contribution on my study of my study. Based on this, I'm providing three hypotheses. The first hypothesis is a positive relationship between explainability and the likelihood to follow recommendations. More accessibility in the coding or the code, more likelihood to follow the recommendation from AI anti-corruption tools. The same relationship with accessibility. The more accessible is the software, the more likelihood to follow the recommendations. And finally, the combination of these two dimensions of algorithmic transparency will further increase the auditor's likelihood to follow recommendation from AI anti-corruption tools. To test this idea, I conduct a vignette experiment with public officials in Chile. So I create, in 4 focus groups, I create an experiment that I will present in the next slides. And I apply this, I pre-register this experiment, and I submit this survey, almost 4,000 public auditors in national, regional, and local levels in coordination with the General Control Office of Chile. Public auditors are very important in the fight against corruption and detecting corruption because they are the first line in public administration. They are in the frontier between the government and an external control, holding accountable to politicians and public officials. I received 926 responses from internal auditors and external auditors with a ratio of response about 56%. This is the checking balance. This will probably be interesting for someone interested in the experimental methods on that. And the groups are balanced. And I'm more interested to trying to explain what I conducted. So this was the vignette that the public official received and says, imagine you have access to a new software that detects irregularities in administrative processes. The system uses AI, that is a computational technology that simulates human reasoning and can make autonomous decisions. During the pilot phase, you must evaluate whether or not to follow the system recommendations. One day, the software generates an alert about a possible irregularity in a process that is part of an ongoing audit. When you require more information about the alert, about the system configuration, you receive the following response. And we provide 4 different responses based on the 4th combination that as I mentioned previously. So the software is based on a confidential access algorithm whose configuration is kept in reserve, and therefore neither operation nor the information being analyzed is known. That is low accessibility, and the opposite is high accessibility, and the same with the low explainability. The software, while identifying possible irregularities, doesn't provide additional information to understand the violated norm, and the opposite is high accessibility, which is highlighted in blue in the slides. After this, we did 5 questions to the participants. So based on what have you read, how likely are you to trust in the alert, replace one of your audits, defend conducting this audit to your superiors, work over time, believe that this software helps identify irregularities? As this research is focused on the the behavioral change, not in the trust on the AI software, I only using 3 main variables, which are the pre-register also. These are the results, and based on these results, I create an index, which I named algorithmic recommendation following, and these are the results that I have. So as you can see in this graph, a first conclusion on this study is the scenario where the software is no explainable and no accessible is the lowest score. So people with a non-transparent software, AI software, they are less likely to follow the recommendation of this software. On the other hand, and the fourth scenario, which is high explainability and high accessibility, is the highest score. Okay, so let's move on to the results. My first hypothesis, if you recall, is this idea of explainability. My results are statistically significant that shows that a software with higher explainability increase the likelihood to follow the recommendation from AI anti-corruption tool. Same positive and statistically significant results for accessibility, where we compare 2 scenarios with high and low accessibility. With high accessibility, public officials and anti-corruption investigators, they follow the recommendation of the software. But the coefficient is slightly lower. So the first scenario in accessibility case is 0.20, and in accessibility is 0.70. However, when I was tested the combination of these 2 dimensions, I didn't find a statistically significant result. What does it mean? So maybe the combination of these 2 dimensions doesn't make any difference. So for the public officials, it's only important to have 1 dimension, that someone can see the code or someone can understand how is reasoning or what is the reasoning behind this software. So to conclude, and this is my last slide, so today, simply having artificial intelligence software available doesn't ensure anti-corruption investigator will actually use it. So we need to create better anti-corruption software with algorithmic transparency, because this is key for public officials to utilize artificial intelligence in corruption detection. Algorithmic transparency doesn't mean only to access the code to the general citizens or to IT system. The most important part is trying to promote that anti-corruption investigators can understand the explanations that, they can understand what is the reasoning, what are the configuration of the software that create the recommendation or that creates an alert when irregularity has been found. That can make a difference to enhance the useful and the contribution of artificial intelligence in the fight against corruption. Thank you so much. I made this presentation. Yo hice esta presentación en inglés, perdón, pero por supuesto estaría feliz de recibir algún comentario o alguna pregunta en español también. Muchas gracias a todos por la atención.
Thank you, Nicolás. Muchas gracias. An interesting topic. I guess most of us are from the social sciences, so this is quite a challenge. I'm guessing for you, but for all of us. So we're going to receive questions after the whole presentations, the 5 presentations. Thank you again, Nicolás. We're going to go next with Manoel Gehrke from the University of Pisa in Italy. And he's going to present an institutional fail-safe, how the gap in judicial independence between higher and lower courts reveals of corruption convictions of former heads of government. Manoel is a researcher fellow at the University of Pisa and a member of Bridging the Gaps in Evidence, Regulation and Impact of Anti-Corruption Policies, Bridge Gap. He received his PhD in political science from UCLA. He works in the field of comparative politics and political economy with a regional focus on Latin America. He's currently writing a book that examines how political elites' responses shape the impact of anti-corruption investigations and judicial convictions in Brazil. Moreover, he is engaged in ongoing cross-national projects examining the consequences of convicting former heads of government on corruption charges, some of which will be presented in this talk. Just one little thing, Manoel, I might interrupt you when you have 3 or 4 minutes left, so just for you to be aware of this. Please, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mario. Thank you also to Giovanna and Bonnie for organizing this, this amazing panel. So today I'm going to present some research which is co-authored with Luciano Darros, who is an assistant professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, right? And so and some of the cases were already discussed by Bonnie in her presentation from before, but we collected the data, right? And these graphs both show the number of increases in the likelihood that former presidents are convicted by the judiciary in the countries that they governed, right, for corruption, and how much it has been growing, not only in the Americas, but across the world. But as you can see in this figure on the right, the increase in the Americas is quite important. Something else that has been happening, right? So if we follow along what happened to these cases, and this includes a case that Bonnie mentioned before as well. So, but also in Peru, right? Some of Fujimori's convictions for embezzlement it went all the process, right? So the prosecution, the indictment, and all the steps towards the conviction, but then a higher court decides to step in and overthrow these convictions, right? So overturn these convictions. The same happened for the case of Lula in Brazil, right? But also across different countries, including in Pakistan with Sharif's cases. Still, there are many convictions that are not overturned, right? This has been so far true for the case of former President Cristina Fernandez in Argentina, but also in South Korea and in France with Sarkozy, right? So in this project, we're trying to understand under what conditions do courts overturn corruption convictions of political leaders, right? So we are going to build on this very prominent theory in judicial politics, which is called the insurance theory, right? Which we try to understand why politicians empower courts to start with, right? So according to this theory, when facing growing political competition, right, the elites empower courts as a way to ensure that they are not going to be weaponized against themselves, right? So as the countries are democratizing, this is why you observe an increase in judicial independence as well. So this theory has been more recently applied to understand, right, the mechanisms of whether actually courts protect elites from post-office investigations, such as the ones for corruption on which our project focuses, right? And the evidence is that, and there's some evidence in favor of this theory, right? Showing that more independent courts are actually shielding outgoing elites from weaponized prosecutions, right? So both in the case of investigations in new democracies by Barry and Kim, 2021, in their 2021 paper, right? They find that court independence is linked to lower probabilities that the former head leaders are investigated for corruption, right? But also in terms of like reducing the actual punishment after that these leaders may serve in the year after they leave office, right? So trying to complement this theory, right, we propose a different way of looking, right, and try to understand in terms of trying to understand why and when the reversals happen, right? And we call this the institutional fail-safe hypothesis. And one of the reasons why we believe that maybe the insurance theory is incomplete in terms of trying to understand the way that that these things work, right, is because for most parts, right, so the politicians have short-term horizons. So the decisions that they take to empower the courts as a way to protect themselves may not fully incorporate the long-term consequences of such decisions. As we have observed, including in many cases in Latin America, right, once empowered, independent courts may become creatures with their own agendas and interests, right, potentially imposing costs on the political elites rather than necessarily protecting them, as it's argued in the studies based which build on the insurance theory. Right, so we argue that we call it fail-safe because it's a redundant protection, right, whose necessity may arise from the risks being built into the long-term effects of judicial dependence as an insurance provision, right? So once the courts are independent, the political elites and people in government may not actually control them, and they could work in ways that they're not coincide with their interests, right? So we argue that, like, in the key idea in our hypothesis, that the dependent higher courts operate as an extra layer of protection to political elites and serve their purpose of sometimes, and given the context, right, as an accommodation strategy, right? So, and this is built on other, also like important tradition in judicial politics, right, that shows that high courts frequently adjudicate cases in ways that align with the preferences of dominant political elites. But they also not only align with the interests of the dominant political elites, but they also may be helpful in terms of solving inter-elite conflicts, right, by stabilizing expectations and preventing excessive costs on powerful actors. And we include this, right? So this is like not literature looking at convictions of former presidents, right? But we think that this helps us explain why these convictions get overturned, right? Because especially because of this, they take into account the logic of political accommodation. So if our institutional fail-safe hypothesis is correct, right, the political elites may keep the superior courts, right? We're talking about constitutional courts and Supreme Courts, right, more political dependent with respect to the lower courts, right, to eventually help them escape the sanctions that are imposed by the courts. And this actually resembles, right, if you think in terms of the appointment mechanisms that exists, right, usually the higher courts are more dependent on the national legislature or are more dependent on the president than the lower courts, which are more professionally appointed, right? So just to summarize this hypothesis in a nutshell, we argue that the greater the political independence of the high courts relative to the lower courts, right? So our argument, differently from the insurance theory, is relative, right? We're looking to the terms of the difference between the political dependence of the high courts with respect to the lower courts, right? And we say that when this political dependence of higher courts is higher, right, it's more likely that the courts will overturn the corruption convictions received by former presidents. So in terms of the empirical strategy, right, we look at the complete data set, like all the cases in which former leaders have been convicted for corruption, and use data on whether these convictions have been later reversed or not. As you can see on this graph on the left, right, when many corruption convictions, corruption convictions are more likely to be reversed than convictions that don't include a corruption charge, right? And especially by the judiciary, right? You can see that it's something like 1/4 of all corruption of cases that resulted in a conviction are later overturned by another court, right? And this is even higher than the number of convictions that get a presidential pardon. So we are trying to understand, right? And we are trying to understand whether these convictions get reversed. And in terms of our theory, the way we test this hypothesis is by constructing, a measure, right, of the gap in judicial independence between the highest courts and the lower courts. Right, and we argue that this is something important because the judiciary in the countries is not something monolithic, right, and it differs, right. So the higher courts and the lower courts have different levels in terms of like their degree of proximity to national or local political elites, right. And this is also something that had been scarcely explored as an institutional explanation for diverging rulings within the same court system, and especially by literature on anti-corruption. So, as you can assume, right? So we're trying to understand whether the courts overturn the conviction, right? In terms, and we want to estimate this parameter beta, right? Which is the effect of the gap in judicial independence, and we use a bunch of controls, right, including important things, right, like just the level of lack of democracy and the level of high court independence, right, and we also use some different statistical techniques to make sure that it's not about reverse causation and it's not about post-treatment bias, right? So we are measuring everything prior to the conviction happening, right? And trying to understand why in some countries the judiciaries decide to reverse the conviction, and in some countries they don't, right? So this is one of our main results, right? As you can see, in places where the gap in judicial independence is high, right, there is no effect on the probability of overturn, while in places where the higher courts are more politically dependent, right, you see the probability of overturning is much higher, right? In order to explore more whether, this is actually about political accommodation, as we hypothesized, right, we also see whether the marginal effect differs by regime level, right? We find that it's actually in democracies that this is taking place, right? So the cases in which for autocracies, there is no marginal effect of judicial independence in the probability of reversal. And it's also the case that this marginal effect is much stronger, right? So this mechanism is much stronger in countries where the lower branch of the legislature is elected based on proportional rulings, right? Where countries where there are much more clear incentives for the governments to build coalitions that they negotiate, right, with a broader base of the political elites, which may include the party of the previous president was convicted, right, and maybe this reversal can be used to accommodate the different political interests of both the government in power, but also of a broader set of political elites. We also observe that this marginal effect is higher, right? So it's more meaningful right after turnover in both the legislature and in the executive branch, right? So these are periods in which the incentives to accommodate, right, for political accommodation because of uncertainty, right, and the incentives for political accommodation among different elites is higher, right? While in places where like there is in periods when there is no turnover in government, the marginal effect of the gap in judicial independence does not explain why some convictions are being reversed. So we also test whether this is driven by ideological competition, and we show that it's not clear, right? So we use whether the head of government at the time of the conviction is from the same side of the ideological spectrum of the leader being convicted or not, right? But it seems to be not that much about ideology, but it's more about actually this accommodation mechanism that we highlight. So in terms
Manoel,
of the
sorry to interrupt. You have 2 minutes left.
Perfect. I'm already almost done. So in terms of the key takeaways, so we show that higher courts often serve as arenas of accommodation between political and judicial elites, right? And and test this systematically in all cases, on all convictions against heads of government since the 40s, right, across the world. But our story is quite relevant for many of the cases that have been happening in the Americas in the last decades, right? So there have been, most of our cases are pretty recent, right, as I showed to you in the beginning, right? So, but also this political accommodation judicial decisions show how these elite court ties can weaken some of the most severe criminal accountability outcomes there is, right? So it's like maybe the most important power that prosecutors and the judicial system have against corruption, right? Which is convicting leaders who were at the, had the highest office in the countries. Right. It also, our contribution is also theoretical, right, in the sense of offering this institutional phases hypothesis to refine and complement important research that was built on the insurance theory. And in terms of implications for governance and trust, right? So in terms of like the policy implications of our research, we highlight the importance of this gap in judicial independence among different levels of courts, right, which is an underexplored aspect of how courts and the relationship between courts and political elites, right? But also we show that there might be inconsistent rulings within the same court system, right? And that these may weaken public confidence in corruption control, which is something that has been the focus also of important recent research, right? But it also may raise further concerns about judicial biases and protection of political elites, right? Which, in addition to the downward, to the consequences that revealing, prosecuting, and punishing corruption has on public opinion, right? These reversals may further erode trust in institutions, important institutions such as the judiciary. So thank you very much. I'm also happy to answer questions if you have them in Spanish and in Portuguese. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you, Manuel, for such an interesting presentation and topic. I'm wondering also if there's something related to some flaws in the design of the judiciary in each country, or if it's just a common case of judiciary capture by the elites. But no time for questions now, but I was wondering about that. Thank you so much again, Manuel. We're gonna keep moving. And I'm gonna introduce Francesco Merenda from the University of Perugia in Italy. And
hello.
Hello, Francesco. He's gonna present anti-corruption laws in South America, an analysis from the perspective of promoting public integrity. Francesco is a postdoctoral researcher in administrative law at the Department of Political Science at the University of Perugia. His work is focused on the integrity of administrative functions, anti-corruption law, and codes of conduct for public officials. Moreover, he works on health law, organization of public administration, and information law. And we have Giovanna here.
Francesco, if he needs the...
So, first of all, I would like to thank Professor Palifka and all organizers of this very amazing conference for giving me this opportunity. Well, before I present my analysis, I would like to make a very short preliminary remarks. I have chosen this title, as you can see, because I believe that today it's more appropriate to talk about the promotion of public integrity and not all about anti-corruption policies. So, in my presentation consists of three main elements. The analysis of, I'm starting from the premise of my research, and then I would like to make a focus on these anti-corruption legislation. Just a minute. Okay. I have a problem with my monitor. Okay. So, yes. These are the anti-corruption legislation that I examined. Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Mexico. I also included Mexico, although it's not part of South of America. And my analysis are focused on these tools and instruments, like such as codes of conduct, anti-corruption laws, conflict of interest regulation, anti-corruption body, and citizen participation. My analysis is based on two main research questions. Are these countries in line with international anti-corruption and integrity framework? And what are the similarities and differences between this legislation and the European country? When we talk about anti-corruption framework, we have to consider the three main pillars, and there are for corruption prevention, controls, and anti-corruption body. But if we study with this perspective, the perspective of public sector integrity, we have to consider that the term integrity not only refers to the absence of corruption, but also includes a set of rules, tools, and measures to promote good governance and other kind of rules. And according to these scholars, integrity is about ethics and is the robust disposition on our officer. For this reason, my research is on a perspective of administrative law, and for this reason, I just analyzed the level of compliance of this country with international anti-corruption convention and standard, and not the actual implementation of these policies. So, these are the two main references: the 1997 Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, and of course, the 2003 United Nations Convention Against Corruption of Merenda. So we start with the Argentina. As you can see, I divided each section, each country, and its anti-corruption framework in 5 parts. So, regarding code of conduct, Argentina presents code of conduct compliance based. As you know, there is a significant difference between compliance and aspirational codes, and these are compliance based in line with Article 8 of Anti-Corruption Convention, due to there are sanctions and some responsibility. Regarding the strategy, Estrategia Nacional de Integridad is very interesting case of national strategy, because promote, of course, anti-corruption initiative, practices, and other, but is very wide and include a guide for the ethical exercise of the civil service public and corruption and integrity towards a new preventive approach. There is regarding the anti-corruption body, there is Oficina Anticorruption, and is in line with Article 6 of United Nations Conventions of 2003, and civic participation. In this side, we can see the presence of Observatorio de Políticas de Integridad, and the El Consejo Asesor. Last, on the anti-corruption legislation, I focused my attention on the ley de ética en el ejercicio de la función pública, since this law embedded in this document the duties, prohibitions, gifts regime, and other important rules. But let me say that there is no specific anti-corruption law. So, and this is the resume of Estrategia Nacional. But we're gonna regarding Peru. Peru has a compliance codes, but in these codes you can see there are more principles than rules, and each public administration must adopt the codes. There is a Política Nacional de Integridad y Lucha contra la Corrupción. These functions are very satisfactory and in line with international recommendations, and there is also a network policy. It set out the anti-corruption functions of the various organs. Regarding the anti-corruption body, there are two examples. The Secretaría de Integridad Pública, that is responsible for guiding the national integrity anti-corruption policies, and the Autoridad Nacional de Transparencia y Acceso a la Información Pública. Regarding civic participation, we have the Comisión de Alto Nivel Anticorrupción is very interesting because it's composed of public, private, and civil institutions. Regarding the law, we have the Ley de Ética en el Ejercicio de la Función Pública, and another element important is that the fight against corruption is a constitutional mandate that stems from the combination of these articles. Another two elements of Peru anti-corruption legal legislation is the Modello de Integridad Pública. I really appreciated this element because embedded the 9 parts that are also present in our European anti-corruption countries, and because this model wants to take some elements of the anti-corruption strategy in just one model. Regarding Colombia, code of conduct in this case are aspirational codes, and even if each public administration has its own code, the strategy Plan Anticorrupción y Atención al Ciudadano is a very interesting thing because it's adopted by all public bodies and contains specific guidelines for the elaboration of this plan, in particular for local policies. And then there is a anti-corruption Secretaría de Transparencia, but it's part of administrative department and as a lot of function. In the civic participation, we have Commission Nacional Ciudadana, that is linked with the Consejo Nacional de Planeación and formulates some strategies, policies, rules, and programs. Regarding the law, the most important is anti-corruption, is the Ley or the Transparency and Corruption Prevention Law, that establishes administrative strength and for the fight against corruption, transparency, and other elements. These are two other important elements, transparency efforts like el Portal Anticorrupción de Colombia y la Línea Anticorrupción. So I'm gonna go faster because my time is almost over. So code of conduct in Chile are like in Colombia aspirational codes, but there is guidelines for adopting them, and also in this case, each administration must have one of these. Regarding the anti-corruption strategy, there is a Estrategia Nacional de Integridad Pública, that is very interesting because cover both the civil service and the private sector and includes the plan d'Action. Regarding the anti-corruption body, there is Comisión de Integridad Pública y Transparencia that manage the the Integridad Pública, and also in this case is led by the Undersecretary General of the Presidency. There is a Espacio Público for civic participation, but in this case is not a constitutional or institutional body, but is just a think tank, but promote various topics, and one of these is dedicated to democracy and the fight against corruption. At the end, we can focus on the ley de probidad and la función pública. There are a lot of measures like conflicts of interest, declaration, and responsibility. But the anti-corruption fragmentage, I saw that in this country is fragmented. Mexico. Regarding Mexico, we have a mixed code, both Código de Conducta y de Ética. The first one are adopted by every public body, and in this code there are a lot of rules. In the second ones, Código de Ética sets out the fundamental principles and values. There is a Política Nacional Anticorruption adopted by the Coordination Committee of the National Anti-Corruption System, and the Proceso de Consulta Integración y Presentación, I maybe, in my opinion, is a very interesting participatory procedure. El Sistema Nacional Anticorrupción is a decentralized body that coordinates government authorities and other elements, and investigating, punishing, and monitoring a lot of items. So in the civic participation, we have Comité de Participación Ciudadana, a very interesting thing, because a very interesting case. The main function is to propose anti-corruption policy for the state, and there are those established at both at the local level, and whose function are established by a specific regulation. And the Ley General del Sistema Nacional, very interesting because establishing the coordination mechanism between the federation and the other entities. So another element is the Reforma Constitucional, and then I'll say, because is a unique case in this anti-corruption field in a global perspective. Last, Uruguay. Regarding code of
Francesco,
conduct, this country.
Francesco,
What?
you have 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Código de Conducta, very detailed code. The anti-corruption strategy is not set out in a single document. And regarding the anti-corruption body, we have Junta de Transparencia y Ética Pública. And in the civic participation, the Comisión Uruguaya de Lucha contra la Corrupción. I go fast because I want to present some findings. Well, in this study, I saw that the promotion of integrity and the corruption prevention policies in this country are adopted in all cases, but with some differences. Code of conduct, some states adopt compliance-based codes and other value-inspirational codes. Regarding anti-corruption's body, they establish it, but with different legal structures, and almost all of them are not independent from the political bodies. A common element is the fragmentation of this anti-corruption legal framework. And then integrity rules are almost always enshrined in civil service laws, codes of conduct. And now there are some similarities and differences with the European anti-corruption legislation. The presence of two anti-corruption bodies, such like in Colombia, as in Colombia, are very similar to the French model. And the Modelo Integrado in Colombia is very similar to the integrated plan of activity and organization in Italy. With regard to anti-corruption participation, bodies are enshrined in law and are two similar cases in Europe, like Espacio de Participación Ciudadana in Catalonia community and the Consejo de Participación de la Agencia de Prevención in the Valenciana community. So integrity rules, duties of conduct, codes of conduct, and of civil servants are mainly established in the laws that governing the civil service. And the other similarities are the presence of anti-corruption strategies and plans and the code of conduct regarding code of conduct such as Colombia and Mexico legislation have adopted in Italy both at national and local level. Training information of civil servants is aligned with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And last, there is a very wide use of guidelines, recommendations, and manuals. Regarding difference, and I'm gonna to conclude my presentation, all the legislation analyzed one or more anti-corruption body dealing with the prevention of corruption. But it's not like in the European country like Croatia, Belgium, Spain, United Kingdom, Norway. In this country, there are only bodies dealing with the repression of corruption. And this is a very important element for Latin South American anti-corruption legislation. And the anti-corruption legal framework of these countries has embedded the international convention and recommendation more than other countries also in our European continent. Citizen participation is plays a very important role in some national system, while in Europe, this element, this function is not institutionalized. And sources of law and corruption, no European country adopted in its constitution for anti-corruption reforms, while some South American countries have introduced in their constitution. Again, on the disciplinary liability, this is not well developed in the code of conduct and in general. But regarding this risk management, we can see the same element. But it's good the presence of some internal controls, in particular in Mexico. Lastly, public integrity, although this principle, this concept is not defined, is defined like as a probidad, principio de probidad, like in France, this concept is more often used to define national plans and strategies, code of conduct, and law. So, concluding remarks. The European American models of integrity face the same problem. In my opinion, the gap between anti-corruption legal frameworks with actual policies implementation. The comparison between European and South American public integrity and anti-corruption models consider two important elements. The difference between these are two elements: civil and common law system, and this is important, and the different political institutional context. In the context of the Americans in the global continent, the anti-corruption legislation of this country may be more in line with the anti-corruption convention than those of countries such as the United States. I conclude with a question for all of you. Can these countries represent an added value or element for the global anti-corruption movement, given the retreat of the United States in this field? My presentation is over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesco, for your presentation. Definitely, integrity is one of the trending topics right now in anti-corruption policies or corruption prevention. So congratulations on that. I do have also a couple of questions for you later regarding the context in South America versus Europe to kind of understand the last things you said. And I'm gonna go with our last presenter, Eduardo Carvalho from the University of California. He's gonna present the assessing the impact of anti-corruption reforms on governance in Latin America, a synthetic control analysis, including the United States, Mexico, Brazil, and understudied countries. Eduardo is a public policy expert and economist with over 20 years of experience in governance, strategic management, and data analysis. He holds a PhD and an MA in social ecology from the University of California, Irvine, and an executive MBA from Fundação Getúlio Vargas. Eduardo has led high-impact roles in Brazilian institutions such as Anatel, the Ministry of Infrastructure, and INEP, managing multi-million-dollar budgets and strategic initiatives in digital transformation, innovation, and public integrity. His research applies advanced methodologies, including latent class analysis and synthetic control models, to investigate corruption and governance. Eduardo is fluent in Portuguese, English, and Italian, and has published on topics ranging from procurement fraud to trust in public institutions. His career is defined by a commitment to ethical leadership, transparency, and efficient public resource management. Welcome, Eduardo, and you have 15 minutes.
Bueno, gracias a todos, saludos. Yo voy a presentar en inglés, okay? And I congratulate all the organizers, Bonnie and Giovanna, for being together. And it's really important to debate corruption in Latin America. And can you see, just checking, can you see the presentation right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So for today, I will focus on the Latin America countries because this I will provide the initial findings, and in another opportunity we can discuss about the analysis of the United States. Well, the first point that we can see, and it's connected with all the studies that we saw right now, is that corruption erodes trust and undermines governance. And for that, this research points focus on the main interventions in Latin America for Brazil, that was the Lava Jato in 2024 and 2014, and Mexico 2016, Honduras, Panama, and Guatemala. And the method that I use for this analysis is synthetic control method, and I use this applying for the one specific indicator of the worldwide governance indicator, that is the control of corruption. And for those who are not familiar with this approach, synthetic control model is really useful to be applied for evaluate the impact of policy intervention. So basically, when you have a specific policy intervention that you want to analyze its impact, this approach try to identify like a synthetic counterfactual. So in our case, for example, in Brazil, we had the Lava Jato operation that started in 2014, and how we can measure the impact if there was no Lava Jato. So this approach is possible to create a counterfactual Brazil country, and when we have this contrafactual Brazil country that is competed by the other countries that didn't was affected by Lava Jato. So this compound will create a synthetic Brazil, and we compare the indicators after the intervention, and the difference between the treated unit, in this case Brazil, and the synthetic unit that will be the synthetic Brazil, it will be inference about the impact on that specific indicator. So STM compares treated countries in the post-intervention trajectory as a synthetic counterfactual. The data source that I used was the perception of control of corruption, that is a rank from 0 to 100. And for each country, the donor pools are composed by countries without a major anti-corruption shock or intervention. And from this approach, we apply the placebo test to assess statistical significance. So here's the graph for Brazil. We can see here that before the intervention, when we apply this approach, we have the lines comparing Brazil and the synthetic Brazil. They are really in the same level. And after the intervention, we can see here there is a gap. So this basically is the inference that the huge impact of Lava Jato in the indicator of control of corruption. We can see here that the root mean square prediction error here is really low, and after that it increased. So the ratio between these two is 6. That means that there is a significant effect. Usually, if the ratio is more than 5, we can see that there is a significant effect on the component that we are analyzing. So the interpretation here is that Lava Jato really exposed deep corruption in Brazil and really eroded public trust. And from this approach, these are the donor countries that were considered and the specific weight for each country. And this suggests that, for example, Peru, pre-intervention in 2014, corruption trend was the closest one behavior compared to Brazil. And we can see also that there is a wide geographic mix of countries that were made to compose this donor pool. In Brazil, corruption trend was not uniquely in Latin America, but also shared patterns with other countries worldwide. And here I present the results applying this same technique for Mexico. And 2016, and we can see here that, and also I'm glad that Bunny in her presentation make a revamp and really a good overview of the situation of Brazil, Mexico, Honduras, Panama that we are talking about now. Thank you so much, Bunny. And here we can see that the institutional reform was made, but not enforced. And here also we can see that there's a reasonable good fit before the intervention, and after the intervention there's a huge gap. And here the post-reform score declined relatively. So here we can see that the control of corruption in Mexico was really below if compared with the synthetic Mexico. So there's an impact of this intervention. So the interpretation is that the reform lacked political backing and implementation. And here are the composition of the donor pools. You can see that Trinidad and Tobago governance trend was very similar if compared with Mexico. Peru has a behavior like Mexico as well. And the donor pool mix suggests that Mexico trajectory had elements of both persistent corruption and also episodes of a reform of corruption. Here I present the results from Honduras that we can see here that the situation of Honduras, there is a temporary improvement during 2016, 2019, but after that, the scores drop below. We can see here that there is a drop here between the two trends. And the ratio here, it's low. So for this result specifically, there is a weak statistical signal for this one. But the interpretation, there is a gains not sustained after the Matthew ended. And here are the composite countries that were the donor pools for Honduras, and the countries with poor governance scored itself that we can see. And Togo saw some anti-corruption reforms as well in the mid-20s, and there is a mix that reflect that few countries have governance trajectories as so persistently low as Honduras. Here is the result for Panama, and we consider 2008 as the main point of intervention. In this case, we can see like a huge fit about the synthetic and Panama and the synthetic Panama. And after the intervention, we can see there is a gap. There is increasing considered indicator of control of corruption. So the ratio is really a large one, indicating there is a very high statistical significance here. And the interpretation that is that the rhetoric not matched the reforms. So there was, we can see that there is a really effort that in 2008 and 2009, Panama began implementing anti-corruption measures and transparency reforms, but like single investigation or law, Panama's intervention was a series of steps that was influenced by external pressures, and later in 2016, Panama also faced a massive revelations caused by the Panama Papers. So here are the donor pools of Panama, and we can see that the heavy reliance of the composite indicator here is in the Djibouti and Namibia. And lastly here about Guatemala, also we can see there is like a reasonable fit, but not more than 5. So there's a weak statistical signal here. And the interpretation is that CT prevented the worst outcome, but removal caused the next slide. And here the composite of this one. And now, what are the preliminary findings about policy implications? That for Brazil, the enforcement without reform. So we had in the initial a short-term exposure, so it generates lowering the perception of corruption, of control of corruption, and a long-term erosion of that in Brazil. The backlash, including political resistance and the winding down of investigation, as told by our colleagues here, means that the current effect was limited. And also, large-scale prosecutions must be paired with reforms in the procurement, audit financing, and judiciary efficiency that can prevent the resurge of corruption. And in this point, also another thing that is critical is not only the judiciary efficiency, but also a good functioning of check and balance. Because if I take just Brazil as example, we have really a huge problem of the functioning of check and balance. So actually right now we have the judiciary that the Supreme Court that has a lot of power, and the Congress that is the entity that could try to control uh, the behavior of the judiciary. The Supreme Court is not doing their work, their work. So there is really a key critical factor that in a democracy there is a check and balance that is really functioning. For Mexico, the policy implications
Eduardo,
had that.
you
Yeah.
have 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes. Please.
Okay, great. We have a reform without enforcement, so it was really ineffective in this way. Creating agents and passing laws, while important, is not sufficient if they are not empowered and insulated from political interference. And anti-corruption efforts must have visible results like convictions, recovered assets, and reduced impunity. And also, this is important to increase the public trust on institutions. For Honduras, external missions help, but gains must be institutionalized. And Honduras' premature termination of Maki, reported to the political elite resistance, means reforms were not deep-rooted and internalized. And reestablishing an international or robust, independent anti-corruption body might be one action that is necessary for Honduras. For Panama, cosmetic reforms may backfire. Genuine transparency and anti-corruption enforcement must accompany promise. Otherwise, hidden corruption will eventually come to light and maybe even bigger and stronger. And Panama needs of substantive changes, tighter financial oversight, prosecuting high-level officials, and ending culture of impunity. And lastly, about Guatemala. Guatemala shows dramatic victory, like jailing a president, that can be ephemeral if the systemic reforms do not accompany it. So a sustained improvement will likely require not just one-off interventions, but continuous accountability mechanisms and insulating anti-corruption reforms on political interference. So as a conclusion here, we can see that anti-corruption efforts often face backlash or implementation gaps, at least based on the countries that we are analyzing here. The need for sustained reforms, judicial efficiency, and public trust. And one of the most important that maybe is the political support. I think that our capacity to fight corruption depends on the quality of our congressmen. If we don't engage on that, it will be difficult to have a long-term instance that can fight corruption. And synthetic control model shows mixed results. We have progress, but progress is possible, but it's also fragile. So thank you so much, and I'm open for question and collaboration.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. And really important what you said about specific successful cases. Sadly, they keep being iconic cases because reforms don't accompany these processes at the end of the day. Thank you so much. So we're gonna open the floor for questions right now. I'm gonna kind of break the rules here because the microphone only works with the computer. So if someone has any questions, I would kindly ask you to come to the front and do these questions. Also, if someone who is online would like to make a question, please raise your hand in the Zoom. Please come, Pedro. We have 10-15 minutes. Okay, yeah. We're gonna have like 3-4 questions, and then we go to the answers. So first, make the questions. Pedro, you can.
Gracias, Mario. Esta pregunta va para Byron en la primera intervención. Cuando hablaba de la austeridad como una política económica relacionada con la implementación o el financiamiento de estrategias, normativa para poder enfrentar la corrupción, ¿por qué hay esta relación entre el Fondo Monetario Internacional, el Banco Mundial, que tú nos señalabas de que tienen unas políticas que te obligan a recortar presupuestos, por ejemplo, áreas como, digamos, el ámbito social, pero también a la implementación de este tipo de iniciativas de anticorrupción? ¿Y qué rol juega la cooperación internacional cuando eso ocurre? Esa es mi pregunta para Byron.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a una segunda pregunta, please, Stephen Morris.
Sí, muchas gracias. Una pregunta similar dirigida a Byron. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, perfectamente.
Órale. Me pregunto en el sentido de no nada más de la correlación, sino la causalidad. ¿Cuál vino primero, la austeridad o la anticorrupción? Si vino la anticorrupción primero y luego la austeridad, o en el sentido de que quizá la anticorrupción fue como la narrativa, la tema para presentar o coordinar la austeridad. ¿Sí me explico?
Sí.
Gracias.
Le doy paso a Manuel, luego a Eduardo y pasamos a las respuestas. Manuel, por favor.
Gracias. No, so I had, a few questions to the other panelists. So for Eduardo, I wanted, I don't know, maybe I couldn't follow some of the logic from your synthetic controls, because did you mention that you're like using countries without major anti-corruption shocks? I'm curious because you're like using Peru as part of the countries that you're using to construct synthetic Brazil, synthetic Mexico, but it's hard. Like even the Lava Jato itself had some degree of consequences in Peru quite clearly, right? So yeah, it would be and it would be, I don't know, useful for us to think like how this may bias your results. For Nicolás, I had question about like, is one of the, like, if we follow, like I follow your arguments, like, is it also the case? I know that you didn't test this directly, but is it also the case that probably like less complex algorithms also like would be better? And are you like in favor of more like in-house, more simple algorithms and like really tested in addition to transparent algorithms? Like, is this like from your findings, did you like, can you remake the argument that you know, this kind of like probably this would like be more compelling for their use, but also like more efficient and more yeah, better in terms of controlling corruption? Yeah, no, that's it. Thank you very much. These are the questions,
Thank you.
comments I had. Yeah.
Thank you, Manuel. And Eduardo, please.
Yeah, I have one question for Nicolás. It's about what I would like to say what is his opinion about the apparent paradox between algorithm transparency and vulnerability. Because if you have the transparency about the algorithm, that the criminals can use this against, because they will understand completely the algorithm. So I will like to hear on that. And for Manoel, that what will be his opinion about this relation about the independence of the superior court and the functioning of check and balance? Because I think this is really a critical factor. It's not only the independence of the judiciary, but the instruments to control all the three branches, that is the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative. This check and balance must work efficiently. If not, we will have problems in the long term. That's it. Thank you.
Was that question clear? Yes, could you write it, please, Eduardo, the second question at least on the chat, because the sound is not the best, it doesn't have the best quality. Could you write it down, please? Thank you. So please, Byron, if you come here, ask the question and then answer the first two questions.
What's Nicolás, the second person? Second one is Nicolás. Sí. Una pregunta para Nicolás. En las personas que fueron aplicadas la viñeta para preguntarles qué tipo de percepción tienen sobre los algoritmos, ¿cuál es el perfil educacional o educativo de los consultados? Y pregunto esto con una doble intención, porque mi miedo, y soy muy franco respecto a eso, es que aquellos que apoyan más la transparencia y la interpretación de los algoritmos puede que sean los que tienen mayor nivel de educación. Hay un problema detrás de eso, que entonces termina siendo que es una posición bastante elitista de nuevo, porque si es que terminamos diciendo que la transparencia y la legitimación de los algoritmos que ayudan a identificar la corrupción favorecen a aquellos que tienen mejores niveles de educación, entonces, ¿qué pasa con aquellos que no tienen los privilegios de ser educados? Por ahí va mi pregunta y anticipo mi doble intención. Esa es mi pregunta.
Por favor, contesta de una vez.
Respondo a las preguntas. Pedro, muchas gracias por tu pregunta respecto a la relación de austeridad y el rol de los organismos como el Banco Mundial y el Fondo Monetario. Hay dos fases. Una fase que fue latente, es decir, que no fue muy explícita, en la cual estos organismos te ayudaban, te presionaban a promover políticas de austeridad, pero de forma indirecta. Es decir, te doy dinero, aplicas ciertas reglas fiscales y esas reglas fiscales implícitamente implicaban reducir gastos en programas sociales. Esa etapa fue sobre todo antes del año 2005-2003. Sin embargo, hay un quiebre, y esto es muy interesante académicamente. Después del 2005, empieza a haber una adopción explícita por parte sobre todo del Fondo Monetario y del Banco Mundial sobre la narrativa anticorrupción. Y explícitamente, ya no de forma latente, sino explícitamente, pedían que se apliquen reformas anticorrupción para parametrizar los requisitos de los préstamos otorgados. Entonces sí hay una relación, pero hay un quiebre. Al inicio fue latente y ahora es más explícito. El rol de los organismos o de la cooperación internacional, muy pasivo y muy criticable desde mi punto de vista. Ellos adoptaron una posición en la cual adoptaban esta narrativa anticorrupción, pero no tenían una posición crítica respecto a los resultados. Esa es una interpretación mía respecto a lo que he visto. La pregunta de Stephen. A ver, para identificar la causalidad respecto a cada uno de los países, hay que ser muy cuidadosos con los supuestos que me permiten llegar a la conclusión de una relación causal respecto a cada país. Y eso depende mucho para poder llegar a determinar si es que la relación es austeridad causa anticorrupción o anticorrupción causa austeridad. Sin embargo, sí puedo proponer una respuesta conceptual. Es el hecho de que la adopción de las políticas de austeridad vienen antes de la adopción de la narrativa anticorrupción. La aplicación de proyectos, la aplicación de condicionalidades de adopción de políticas de adopción de parámetros fiscales para los países antecede, sin lugar a dudas, a la adopción de políticas anticorrupción. Esto estamos hablando de los años 70, 80 y sobre todo 90. Y como todos conocemos en este espacio, la adopción de políticas de anticorrupción ya deviene en una época de los años 90. Entonces, más desde un lado conceptual y sobre todo histórico, yo creo que lo que antecede es esta adopción de políticas de austeridad que se materializó en los años 90, pero sin lugar a duda el discurso de austeridad estaba presente mucho antes.
Muchas gracias, Byron. Please, Eduardo, if you could answer Manuel's question, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Manuel, for pointing that. And I just realized that when we do our polling, we do in two steps. The first step, we do the synthetic model, choosing all the countries in the database. And the second step that we do is pulling out all the countries that were affected by that intervention. And mistakenly, I put in the presentation, and I didn't realize that, I put the presentation, the first step, not the other one, with the countries without that intervention. And I really appreciate that I didn't find out. Thank you so much, and I invite you for collaboration as well.
Thank you, Eduardo. Nicolás, you have 3 questions. I'm not sure if the third one is already in the chat.
I could understand the three questions, so that's okay. So perfect. The first one from Manoel. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah, complexity is a big topic here, especially because artificial intelligence is something that nobody can completely understand how machine learning is working. And there are a lot of experts trying to say, yeah, this is how ChatGPT works. But honestly, nobody can explain that because it's a black box. And every day, artificial intelligence is advancing day and day more and more. And that means that the complexity behind the software is higher. So we are creating more layers in this black box. So to trying to explain a public official or a public investigator about how the software is working is a major challenge. So absolutely agree with you. So trying to translate the reasoning behind the algorithms in human language is a major challenge. So absolutely. And that is a problem also for corruption, because many governments are using artificial intelligence for delivering social assistance programs. So how now we can control that if there is an algorithm, a very complex algorithm in a black box making decisions? Who will be explaining that? What are the criteria behind that is a major problem. Second question from Eduardo. There is a major issue also to trying to balance transparency and the anti-corruption strategies. Because if you totally transparent, what are your rules to detecting corruption? there is more chances to the corrupt people will game the system, right? So to trying to focus there or to align their behavior towards the control that is conducted by anti-corruption agencies. So yes, there is I would say that probably we need like layers of transparency, because anti-corruption investigators, they need higher levels of transparency, but internal auditors, which are under control, they need a lower level of transparency, and probably citizens needs the level of transparency that doesn't generate a problem for the detection of corruption. And finally, voy a cambiar a español, la tercera pregunta referida al perfil educacional. Súper interesante la pregunta. Hay dos maneras de responder eso, porque cuando pensamos en educación de los participantes, la mayoría de ellos son profesionales. Son profesionales porque es un grupo de 1.000 auditores públicos, y por lo tanto el 60% son auditores de formación, el 30% son abogados, y hay un 10% que son otro tipo de profesiones como cientistas sociales o administradores públicos. Tienen altos niveles educacional, tienen altos niveles de experiencia. ¿Hay una relación entre mayor educación y apoyo a la inteligencia artificial? No, yo no encontré nada. Y los estudios anteriores tampoco explican eso. Pero donde sí hay una relación importante es entre mayor conocimiento de inteligencia artificial y apoyo a la inteligencia artificial. La gente que sabe más sobre inteligencia artificial la apoya más. El problema es que, y tomando lo que decía Brian, se genera una brecha, ¿no? Hay gente que no sabe de inteligencia artificial porque no está siendo formada o porque tiene miedo a la tecnología, porque cree que su trabajo va a ser reemplazado, y por lo tanto hay una brecha que es muy difícil abordar. Y lo tercero, y algo súper interesante, y eso es casi anecdótico ya, es que las personas que han experimentado con inteligencia artificial en su organización están apoyando menos los modelos de inteligencia artificial. ¿Por qué? Porque probablemente hoy día hay muchos políticos, muchos jefes de instituciones públicas diciendo que ellos están usando inteligencia artificial, pero no está funcionando del todo bien. Entonces es un aprendizaje que estamos viviendo, y eso es súper interesante porque vamos a ser la primera generación, nosotros, quienes vamos a ver cómo los gobiernos se están transformando con tomadores de decisión automatizados. Así que muchas gracias por las preguntas.
Muchas gracias, Nicolás. Yo me voy a quedar con las ganas de hacer un par de preguntas, pero sí les voy a escribir por interno. I'm gonna text Manoel and Francesco for 2 additional questions. I think there's an extra question for you, Nicolás, in the chat, or for someone for Manoel. So if you could answer in the chat, that would be great. Thank you all. Great presentations, great first panel. So we start with strong foot here, and we'll see each other at 2 p.m. Right? We're gonna come back at 2. Yes. So thank you all, and please come back for the people from Zoom. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.